time for more of Sports Talk 58, presented by WTAG Sports. You can join in our discussion by calling 793-9400. 793-9400. Now, once again, here's Tim Donner.
And welcome back to Sports Talk 58, and we are pleased to welcome as our three guests tonight here on Sports Talk, Mr. Jock Semple, Mr. John Kelley the Younger, no relation to John Kelley the Elder, I suppose is the first thing I should say about him, and Tom Murphy. The three of these men have collaborated on a book called Just Call Me Jock, about Jock Semple, who is called Mr. Marathon, the dean of Boston sports trainers for 30 years, still going strong at age 80. 79. I beg your pardon. I don't want to make you... That'd be like calling... Well, I'm not going to give away my age at the same time. Jock runs a physiotherapy clinic at the Boston Garden, which is called Salon de Rubdown. He has treated some of Boston's greatest athletes. They call him the Baron of Glasgow, Magic Fingers. We could probably spend an hour, Jock, just describing all the people you've treated and all the names you've come up with. John Kelley the Younger, as we mentioned, no relation to John Kelley the Elder. John, a native of Mystic, Connecticut. Jock Semple has served as father confessor to him for years. John Kelley the Younger, a household name to anyone familiar with the Boston Marathon. He won it in '57. He's won 8 national championships, and collaborating with them on the book is Tom Murphy. And Tom is winner of the 1978 Canadian Broadcasting Corporation Playwriting Prize. He's worked as a reporter and newspaper editor in New York and Boston, and currently he's a director of public relations at Biscayne College in Miami, which is where I wish I was, considering the snowstorm that's headed this way. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure having you in the studios with us, and I got a chance to read much of your book over the weekend. Jock, Johnny Busick said in the book that you added years to his career with your treatment. What is a secret to your rubdown? Can you reveal it here on 5,000 watts?
No, I don't think there's any secret, just dedication. There's too many people call their masseurs and this and that, but they don't have the love of it. I just seem to enjoy doing it. That's, I mean, the whole thing. But when I did go to physiotherapy school, I concentrated on massage because I figured the physiotherapists, the field was limited, and there was a bigger field to get into the health business. But I don't know. I just, maybe it's in my fingers, I'm not. I know when I worked at the YMCA as a locker room boy during the Depression, we had a man there behind the counter, and everybody said he could always tell where you were injured and things like that. I don't know. I just think they're flattering me sometimes. But I really am dedicated to my work, and I enjoy doing it, and I think I get a better thrill out of that than I do out the greenbacks that I frugally get.
You're still at it 6 days a week at age 79. I guess you don't feel age 79, do you?
Oh, no. Except with the aggravation of the marathon, I'm beginning to... I got a chauffeur to drive me out, one of my runners, Bill Feeney. Tom brought me out, and Feeney's going to take me back to Boston. I was afraid I might fall asleep on the way back. That's the only thing I'm lacking, is sleep.
Kind of reversing roles a little bit, having someone come to pick you up in an auto. You mentioned all the aggravation involved in being in your position with the Boston Marathon. Is it said in the book you could write a book just on all the phone calls that you have accepted, and that you probably hate the telephone, probably hate Ma Bell by now?
Well, I often talk to people, and sometimes people, I don't know, they're dumb or something, but I say to them once in a while, when they're in there, I'll say, gee, I wish Don Amici had never been born. And they look at me they don't know what I'm talking about. And then I'll have to explain to them. Don Amici played Mr. Bell on the movie of Bell's Life. Then it gets through between the ears that I'm just using Don Amici that way. But sometimes I do. It's terrible.
The name of the book is Just Call Me Jock, and we have the three men who collaborated on it. The man about whom the book is about, Jock Semple, and co-authors John Kelley the Younger and Tom Murphy. How did the idea of this book get started, gentlemen?
Well, years ago, back around 1970, I forget the man's name, White, Mr. White, he was Dean of Journalism at Boston University. He brought one of his students down who wanted to write on my wife's, write something about me for his master's degree. And then it went from there. We gave tapes, and I wrote some stuff for him, and then he tried to peddle it up around Boston, and I sent it to Hal Higdon's publisher, and they all liked it, but they thought it was very provincial. At that time, you were only getting 300, 400, 500 in the Boston Marathon, and the Runner's World, the Bible of long-distance running, was hardly created then. So, and I finished it in 1972, and it just lay dormant for a while. And then Will Monahan of the Globe, or the Herald American, told me, he come down to me one day and he says, he says, everybody's writing books on running. He says, why don't you write one? As I said, I says, I can't tell them how to run. I can't give schedules. I don't believe in them, and I don't believe in all this nonsense that in some of these books. I says, only I could tell them is to put one foot in front of the other. And then Leo got too busy, and I think he contacted Tom, didn't he?
Leo contacted
Leo
me
contacted Tom, and then it just mushroomed from then, and Tom got in touch with Johnny, and here we are.
What happened was I wrote a magazine article about Jock, and he liked the way it came out. He said I made him a hero, and he said that maybe if we expanded that and did the book together, then his wife Betty would believe that also, that he's not as bad as all the stories about him were purportedly paint him.
John, how'd you get involved?
I was going to the Boston Marathon 2 years ago. It will be 2 years next week, Tim. And went to the BAA booth in the Heinz Auditorium, where the day before they have a number of exhibitions, companies and clubs and so on. And, of course, Jock was manning his own booth and doing his inimitable routine with his adoring public, trying his best to bully them to death, but they kept coming back for more. And I took a sideline position and happened to find myself standing next to a young man who was assiduously scribbling in a tiny reporter's pad. And I couldn't help but strike up a conversation with him. Turned out it was the gentleman on my extreme left here, Tom Murphy, who was in the throes of doing Jock's memoirs and adapting them to present circumstances. And he had the present down pretty well. And Jock, of course, had provided him a great bulk of past events, but there was a missing segment. That is the 50s and early 60s, the period during which I was most active with Jock in his then Flying Colors team. So Tom asked me kindly if I would like to join him in the enterprise by doing some anecdotal stuff on that period, and I was only too happy to do that. And at the time, coincidentally, I had just quit my teaching job of 22 years, incidentally, and was casting about for something to do. So this kind of jived with the freelance writing I was trying. And since then, Jock and Tom and I have worked as a kind of Boston sports triumvirate, I guess, trying to expand and whittle down at the same time. And one of the problems we've encountered is the balance, and the size. Jock's, as he says, his memoirs could themselves, out of literary form or attempted literary form, they could go 3 or 4 times the length or the size of the present volume. But
I think through the years, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'll turn that over to Tom. But I think part of our problem was to focus, to narrow, to focus and select, and we've tried to present a volume which will incorporate Jock through the incredibly long time he has associated with the marathon and sports in Boston.
Jock is most closely associated with the Boston Marathon, but he's been a central figure in a dozen sports in Boston. And for initially, when the Celtics were created, he was a trainer for the Celtics, and later on became a physiotherapist for the Bruins. And between periods of the Bruins and Celtic games, Jock would take scraps of paper and jot down various memories that he had of his life. It was these memories that were compiled in 1970, and they were just compiled almost in a straight form. I did this, I did that kind of thing. And what Johnny and I sought to do is to recreate for the reader what it would be like to spend a day in Semple's salon de rubdown. Okay, you mentioned earlier that he's up at 6 o'clock every day, and he's at work in the garden 6 days a week.
And feels guilty that he's not working 7.
Well, he
I
does.
gave up the 7. I
Well,
was
sometimes
7.
he does work 7.
Yeah.
Sometimes he does. And what Johnny and I sought to do is open the book with, the reader is welcomed into the salon de rubdown, where Jock is training athletes as well as businessmen in Boston. And as Jock works on the patients in this memory play, as Johnny and I call it, Jock tells stories about the old marathons and about those dozen sports that he worked so closely with. And then Johnny comes in with tender recollections of the 50s, and through sensitive evocations of that time, enhances the stories that Jock himself tells. So we switch back and forth from Jock's voice to Johnny's voice.
Jock, you've been involved in the marathon for 50 years now, 52 years, I guess. You mentioned your 2 favorite marathons as 1930 and 1957. Why?
Well, 1930, during the Great Depression, which some of the old-timers who may be listening now remember very well, I was working I was unemployed in Philadelphia, and to be unemployed back in the 30s, no Social Security, no food stamps, no nothing. You had to depend on picking up odd jobs, and it was rough, but I kept my running. I still say my running saved me from jumping off the Delaware Bridge, not the Mystic Bridge. That was a big bridge there. But it was my salvation, and I've no regrets for any of these things. But see, I go off on tangents here.
Well, the tangents are the interesting thing. That's what you go off when you rub people down, though, Jock. That's the whole key.
It's been my whole life, but that year when my mother came out from the old country to visit my brother that I was living with, I was working, no, I wasn't even working at the YMCA. I was picking up odd jobs as a carpenter here and there, and going to the movies once in a while when my mother paid the way in. But she came over here, and I run the marathon that year, and it was my best. I did 7th. I beat many a big time. That's when I really broke in big time. I got 3rd in the national championship, but the 7th in Boston, and my mother right at the finish line was a big thing.
Jock was talking about the hard time that the runners had back then. He hitchhiked up from Philadelphia for that 1930 marathon, hitched all night in those old cars with the isinglass curtains, got into Boston, and as he said, his mother was at the finish line, so finishing 7th was heartwarming for him. But then he went back to Philadelphia, and at that point, he suspects that the foreman on his job, he was changing the seats in the subway cars, that was his job back there, and he suspects that the foreman was laying for him for going, leaving work to go run a race. Runners were greatly disparaged in those days. And Jock's feet still hurt from running so well at Boston, and he changed his shoes, but the foreman looked at his feet and saw that he had a different pair on, and he went up to him and said, "Any man that changes his shoes, on my time is not worth my payroll," so he fired him. And at that point, Jock said, well, if that's what it's going to be, I'm going to go back to Boston, and he's been here ever since.
We think, incidentally, that one thinking as I listen to Jock and Tom talk about the old days, that one of the fascinating things in Jock's story is the contrast between the way runners had to live when he was starting out and the way the hotshot runners live today. I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday on Jock's Club, a longtime friend of both of ours, Jerry Harvey, who is completing his master's thesis on the subject of the marathon, a national fixation since 1972, an American fixation since 1972. But his thesis points out that there has been a complete flip over in our attitude toward the marathon race that was ushered in at the time of Frank Shorter's
Marathoners were considered
victory.
freaks back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that?
Well, I think there was a strong element of sublimated envy because they were doing something that was really virile, that was really manly, and it ran counter to the manufactured image of manliness, which you might associate with smoking a cigarette or driving a fast car or any of the things that Madison Avenue likes to associate with manliness. We would call it today, I suppose, the macho. It was almost a point of envy to see someone out there doing freely what the advertisements couldn't get for them. The world that consumerism tried to present them was not a world that fulfilled them. And here was Jock doing something so simple and elemental every day to restore his sanity in a world of push, push, push. and actually going out and occasionally winning laurels and, brief headlines for that, that I think a strong element of envy did arise in people, and I think that obtained all through those hard years when this little core of devotees kept at their loving pursuit, and they never were beaten down by circumstances. And I think now that, as Jerry points out, my friend Jerry, nationally we're kind of experiencing an identity crisis today. We're questioning all the things that we used to think about what made us ourselves. We're reaching out to toward that kind of fulfillment.
Jock's contemporaries in the 30s, today they're the legendary figures of the marathon. But these people worked long days, and they might work 14, 16-hour days, and then have to squeeze in time for running. And they would do it oftentimes at night, and they might wear long pants, so in case someone saw them coming down the street, they could walk, so that people wouldn't identify them as runners.
Right.
Jock was saying one time that he was running, and somebody would lean out a car window and shout, "What are you running for, president?" I mean, these things are hard for someone who's a recent initiate to the running game to perceive. But the interesting thing about Jock is he is a living link with that era. And an interesting theme in the story we try to tell is that Jock was, in a sense, mentored by Bill Kennedy, another one of the old-time runners, the man who, the story goes, he hitchhiked into Boston from New York and slept on a pool table in the South End and won the 1917 race. He recognized a certain talent in Jock, and he took Jock under his wing. And then when Jock's own running days, peak running days, began to pass, Jock then took Johnny under his wing, so that we have 3 distinct generations. And a 4th generation, Bill Rogers, Frank Shorter, Salazar, all of those people were taking a lead from Johnny Kelley, the younger, okay, who's seated here tonight. So we have in this room Jock and Johnny, who are, represent 50 years of marathon history, and importantly so.
We are talking with Johnny Kelley the Younger, Jock Semple, and Tom Murphy, familiar names to all marathon fans, and we're going to open up the phone lines for you now at 7939-400. 7939-400, the number to call, and we didn't really finish, Jock, about before you were mentioning about 1930 being one of your favorite marathons, the other being 1957, and that ties in very much with the man sitting on your right and with what Tom just said. Why was 1957 so special?
Johnny won Boston that year, and that was making up for all my disappointments, and it was great to see him come across the finish line.
He's always been your protege?
Well, I never trained him, I never coached him, I encouraged him. Some people flatter themselves that they coach Shorter or they coach Salazar. They wouldn't. They coach somebody with a lot of ability. It's the easiest thing. Well, Johnny had ability, so I didn't coach him, but I encouraged him, and when he was feeling blue or having a hard time with Doug Raymond, his Simon Legree of a coach at Boston University, I could cheer him up, and that's all I've done all my life.
Well, of course, it's more than just cheering him up. I mean, Jock is not going to take the credit for it, but Johnny probably can tell you better Jock's contribution.
It's all in the book. If they all want to get it, they'll get it down at Bill Rogers' store in downtown Worcester.
I just like, if I have a minute to interject, I think the thing that has attracted so many people to Jock through all these years, generations, is that his loving presence has made it possible for them to go. He doesn't think of the hours he puts in. He doesn't think of working for the Bruins, for example, on an hourly pay basis, or the Celtics, or Tony DeMarco, or any of the fighters he's worked with over the years, or the great athletes he's had. He's always been there for all of those people, and he's there for the runners. And of course, the runners are his first love. But I don't think he discriminates. He's completely generous in his time and his presence, and it's as he points out, serial comically, it's hardest on his wife, but it's hard for him to get home at any reasonable hour, because there's always somebody coming into him, and he never closes his door.
Jock, you say in the book that over the years many potential sponsor has approached you about sponsoring the Boston Marathon, and you said you always scared them off by saying, if you start out by giving me a nickel for every free hour I put in, then we'll talk. If you got a nickel for every free hour you've put in, would you be a millionaire right now?
Well, I don't know, but I don't do that
Many
to the
times
sponsor. It's a little misrepresentation. The sponsors have hounded. See, they're talking now about the professionalism of the Boston Marathon. We've been hounded for years, people that wanted. Even today, I got some crazy guy who's got some kind of fancy cereal that'll make you a franc shorter overnight. But I've always said that as far as being paid, or the runners being paid, when I get a nickel an hour or something like that, I'll agree with it.
We're going to talk more about the commercialization of the Boston Marathon, which has now become a reality. A reminder that you're listening to Sports Talk 58 here on WTAG, and my guests this evening, fascinating guest, Jock Semple, Mr. Marathon, the Dean of Boston Sports Trainers, author of the book Just Call Me Jock, along with John Kelley the Younger, perhaps the most famous ongoing participant in the Boston Marathon, and Tom Murphy, who collaborates with John and Jock in the book, Just Call Me Jock. We're going to take your phone calls at 7939-400, 7939-400, and we'll return to talk more with these gentlemen in just a moment.
You're listening to Sports Talk 58 on the sports leader for Central New England, WTAG. The phone lines are open for you now at 793-9400, 793-9400.
And
Now, once again, here's Tim Donner.
okay, we're finally here. My guests this evening on Sports Talk 58 are Jock Semple, John Kelley the Younger, and Tom Murphy, who all are combined to write the book Just Call Me Jock, about Jock Semple, Mr. Marathon for 30 years, the Dean of Boston Sports Trainers, the man who runs Salon de Rubdown at the Boston Garden, the Baron of Glasgow, you name it. We have a phone call, and again, the number to call is 7939-400. Good evening, and welcome to Sports Talk 58.
Tim, hello, Mark Epstein. How are you?
Okay.
Tim, I just wanted to welcome your guests, Mr. Semple and Mr. Kelley, and Tom Murphy to Worcester.
Mark Epstein, by the way, folks, if you're not familiar with him, is from Charlie Surplus. Charlie Surplus Road Race, of course, is perhaps the most well-known of the local road races. Go ahead.
Well, anyway, I just wanted, on behalf of the running community in Worcester, to welcome them to Worcester. I can't say enough about what Mr. Kelley and Mr. Semple have meant to the running boom, or maybe we're past the running boom right now, but to running in general over the past decade, for their hard work that they put in 40, 50 years ago. It certainly wouldn't be anywhere near where it is today, and just want to acknowledge that and tell John that we're looking forward to having him in our race again this year. He's participated a couple years in a row, and he's become close friends of our family, and we enjoy his relationship. And also to like to get Mr. Semple's impression on what I'm going to ask him, and that is, since 1967, when you became, pretty well known with that incident in Boston with that lady,
Beat me to the punch.
Kathy Switzer, and to 1972, when you had your first official woman winner, and that was Nina
Cusick.
Right, okay. And it must be really heartwarming to you to see how women have been successful in the sport of running, and how their future is probably is more unlimited today than even the man. It's been quite a turnaround, hasn't it?
Well,
Semple.
in the first place, I was never opposed. Some of the cub writers today still bring up that incident, the shoving incident, as they call it. I was never opposed to women's running, but I've always been in favor of rules being run. Kathy and I have been the best of friends since then, and I'm really pleased at my mother was president of the Clydesdale Harriers women's section, but I've been very pleased with the progress the women have done. But I will say, from the very beginning, even when they were sneaking into it and getting in legally, there've been less trouble than the corpulent individuals with the 62-inch waistlines and entering the race late and faking their times. The women have been wonderful.
Well, you've done a great job, and I just we have a road race meeting tonight at 8 o'clock that I'm going to head down to right now, and I was just wondering if I can swing by, if you don't have any plans for after the talk. If you'd like to come and speak at our meeting, we'll have about 50 or 60 guests there. And I think they'd enjoy seeing Mr. Kelley especially.
Well, we'll have to see about that.
Before Mark signs off, Tim,
Yeah, Mr. Kelley.
I'd just like to thank you, Tim, and please give my very best regards to your father and your family. I much enjoyed your race last year, and I'm looking forward to it. It's a highlight on my running calendar. So looking forward to Charlie's race in May. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one thing from Tom Murphy for you.
Well, I was wondering whether maybe for those listeners that don't have a working knowledge of the marathon game, maybe it would be helpful at this point to explain a little bit of background about what Mark and Jock were calling the Great Shoving Incident. In 1967, a young woman from Syracuse...
Don't tell them too much. Let them buy the book and read it.
Thanks again.
Thank you for your phone call, Mark. Of course,
Jock,
she's
you and
a
I-
Syracuse graduate, I might mention, which I also am, and we're getting in trouble all over the place. So,
I think, Jock, that what I'll do is I'll tell it to a certain point, and then you cut me off and say it's in the book. Okay? But I think there are people out there who maybe don't know the story, and Kathy Switzer, who was from Syracuse, had decided that she wanted to run the Boston Marathon, and trained for it. And she contends that she sent her application in with the name K. Switzer because that's how she signed her name all the time. She contests that she signs her names on checks, K. Switzer, etc. She signed her application K. Switzer, and Jock, who processed the applications during the periods of the Bruins and Celtic games, sent her a number, thinking that the K was Kevin or Carl or something like that. The day of the race, however, the newspaperman pointed out that in fact K was a woman, and Jock, considering this a violation of the rules, got off the press bus and, in his own inimitable way, gave chase to Kathy down the road. At that point, Kathy's boyfriend, who weighed 220 pounds, planted a shoulder indelicately into Jock's ribs. Jock will contend he never did fall, but the story is he landed in a ditch and Kathy landed on Johnny Carson. And Jock made Kathy famous and himself infamous. I won't tell anything more than that.
Okay, but I still contend that he was a very, very poor shot putter and a hammer thrower and a football player. He couldn't knock me off my feet. So I guess he never got much chance of playing in the first team at Syracuse University.
Jock, what I've never got to ask you, and maybe I should take advantage of this moment to do, what part did my old friend from Syracuse, Arnold Briggs, play in that incident?
Well, the part he didn't play was he never run in Boston for 3 years because I told Cloney if Briggs ever got in... The part he didn't play was he never run in Boston for 3 years because I told Cloney if Briggs ever got into the marathon, Semple resigned. But then it softened after 3 years and let him in.
Well, what did he do?
He must have taken the physical exam for her.
Johnny, you know you're baiting Jock here. Arnold Briggs, Johnny knows, trained Kathy. He was a mailman living in
I know, but he
Syracuse.
must have taken her physical.
And an old running buddy of Jock's, but after 1967, a former running buddy of Jock's.
we're talking here on Sports Talk 58 with Jock Semple, Mr. Marathon, the Dean of Boston Sports Trainers, John Kelley the Younger, perhaps the most famous of all participants, or one of the most famous to be sure, in the Boston Marathon, and Tom Murphy, who collaborated with the two aforementioned gentlemen in the book, Just Call Me Jock. And we're going to welcome your phone calls at 793-9400, 793-9400. Gentlemen, you mentioned before that you thought that the advent of Frank Shorter was when people's perceptions of marathon runners started to turn. Why Frank Shorter?
Well, I think personally that it was both a case of Frank's own charisma, if you will. He was a Yale man. He was educated. People suddenly perceived that the marathon was a fit arena for someone with other than strictly athletic aspirations and preparations. And of course, it was also historical. It was that moment that, as my friend Jerry Harvey points out in his thesis, that Americans were beginning to look elsewhere for their heroes and the images that they could identify with, Tim. You know, I think that ever since that 1972 Olympic turning point, and so much was made of Frank's being the first Olympic victor since Johnny Hayes did it in 1908, that it was just a kind of a coming together of things, forces, if you will, a fateful turn. Frank won. He might not have won, but he did win. And because he won and because he was an attractive personality, because something in the American psyche responded to him at that moment, and because we were ready for new heroes. I think you could say, for whatever it's worth, that Frank Shorter is a fitting symbol of the new era in marathon running.
Do you, Tom?
Yes, I think that in a moment I'll let Jock tell his impression of Johnny and his impression of the contribution that Johnny made. But Johnny, I think, was an important step on the way to Frank Shorter and to Bill Rogers and to now Salazar and a host of others. Whoever comes from this point on was enabled, and it was possible for them to come along for the work that Johnny Kelley did in the 1950s. And Johnny Kelley was able to make that contribution in large part for the work Jock did in helping Johnny along.
So you'd say maybe that perhaps the three most important men in marathon running have been Jock Semple, Johnny Kelley the younger, and Frank Shorter. In terms of three...
I think in terms of American marathon running, recent American marathon running history, a lot of people, if estimates say that there are now 35 million runners, certainly the overwhelming majority of those runners are recent initiates to the sport. But when I say recent American marathon history, I'm talking the 50 years that Jock has been a central figure in the Boston Marathon. Of course, Jock ran his first Boston Marathon in 1929. He finished in the top 10 9 times. After his peak running days passed, he then he became a trainer and began working in that capacity, and also in the administration of the Boston Marathon as the co-director. Do we have a moment? Can I tell a story about Jock? How he met Johnny?
Go ahead.
Okay. Jock, as he passed those peak running days of his own in the 40s, he always had a sharp eye for young talent, and he had just founded the BAA marathon team. He did that as a favor to Walter Brown, and he went down to a race in southern New England, and he heard that Vic Dreigel was going to be running, and Vic Dreigel was one of the premier American 10,000 meter men, and nobody was expected to contest Dreigel in this race. But there was a young kid, 17-year-old boy, who had a pair of track spikes, and he took the spikes out of the bottom of the shoe, and he taped the toe of the shoe with adhesive tape around and around. The gun went off, Vic Dreigel shot out to the front, but also the 17-year-old kid shot out into the front with Dreigel, and Jock watched this, of course, with great interest. Well, the adhesive tape came unraveled, and then the shoes themselves disintegrated, and the 17-year-old kid ran stride for stride with Dreigel in his bare feet. Finally, the blisters forced the young kid into a ditch, but Jock looked at that kid. The kid was Johnny Kelley, and Jock said, "This man is going to win Boston someday." And at that point, Jock took Johnny under his wing.
And the rest is history. 793-9400 is the number to call. We're talking with Jock Semple, John Kelley the Younger, and Tom Murphy of Boston Marathon fame. And good evening. Welcome to Sports Talk. Good evening.
Good evening.
Would you like to turn your radio down, please? Because we're on a delay. You won't be able to hear yourself live.
Oh, want me to turn it down?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
And we have the pregnant pause to wait while he turns his radio down.
They always do that.
Yes. It's a constant battle.
Jock can sell books during those pregnant pauses. He's very good at that.
Are you there? Are you there? Well, I think I'm just about running out of patience. Hello? Are you still there?
Hello?
Hello, yes. What can we do for you?
Yeah, could I talk to Jock?
Go right ahead.
All right, Jock.
Yeah.
I don't think you remember me. Maybe you do. You know Johnny Simconis from Worcester?
Yep.
How are you doing, Jock?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
We
You're
had many
doing a good
battle.
job in the program.
Yeah, I'm glad you're listening.
That's right. And I want to congratulate you and Bill Clowney and them for the good job you're doing on a BAA marathon.
Do you think I've improved my English from the days in the 30s?
I guess so, Jock. You haven't changed much. Anybody could tell who you were, you know what I mean, when I'm listening to you and everything. And we had a lot of fun in those days, didn't we, Jock?
I sure did.
That's your life. I don't know. It seems so different with so many running. When we ran, there weren't so many, were there?
No, but it's good for them. I'm glad to see it.
That's right. And, Jock, hey, what do you attribute to the fast running of today compared to when we ran?
Well, they've got better conditions, better equipment, more time to train. I say they're better than we were, but the conditions are so much better.
That's right. And we don't want to forget Biddy McMahon, do we? How he ran a good marathon from Worcester. You remember Biddy?
Yeah, I remember him. He blew it when he went to
second
bed.
here, then he went to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
He won the national marathon, and then he went to Germany to run in the Olympics.
Yeah.
That's right. He did a tough job, and he was a nice runner, and he was a good runner.
You weren't too bad, John.
Yeah, that's right. Say, Jock, how could I get a hold of your book?
Bill Rogers' store.
Oh, Will Rogers. Oh, it's right in Worcester. I can
Right
get
in
it.
Worcester. And tell all your friends, because
I'll do that, Jock.
I want to see these fellas make $1 million.
Yeah, because, I mean, they'll bring back memories to
Yeah,
me
you'll
when
get-
I read it, you know what I
You'll
mean?
get it. What about Poof? Tell Poof too. Tell all the people I used to run against.
Oh, that's right.
go
I
down
will.
and-
All those that are still living, like Joey Pluff. He's
Get
passed.
them all down there to Rogers and sell 500,000 books, and
Yeah, that's right.
maybe I'll get a vacation.
Yeah, and I can't tell my friend Bud McGlone because he's passed away. I don't know
yeah,
whether you
yeah.
know it or not, Jack. Remember Bud?
You'll get a lot of memories if you read that book.
Yeah. Okay, Jack, and good luck and keep the good work on your program. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you for your phone call
All
this
right,
evening.
bye-bye.
793-9400 is the number to call. And we're talking with Jock Semple, John Kelley the Younger, and Tom Murphy, who all collaborated on the book, Just Call Me Jock. And, of course, any Boston Marathon fan will be familiar with these gentlemen. Do you think that we are still in a running boom? Has it peaked? Is it on the way down? Has it leveled off? What do you think, Jock?
It's not they're going to go down. I come along Store Drive today, and they're still running out there by the hundreds. It's not coming down. It's not a case of like those putting greens that they had and the clock golf and all those fads. The running game's here to stay because the people know that they're healthier than they were before. And, of course, the doctors are maybe not so busy with heart attacks, but the people that take care of the orthotics and all that, they're making a bundle in the new fancy uniforms, but that's okay. But the people know they're here to stay.
Johnny?
No, I agree with that. I think when you found something that you can respond to, however you've picked it up, you might have picked it up at a cocktail party, but when you do it and you find out that it's good and it's basic and it's returning you something and it's getting you back to nature and it's making you feel whole, then you'll stay with it. And in spite of all the hoopla, and there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of phoniness, there's a lot of exploitation, and there are a lot of things being sold that shouldn't be sold, but at the bottom, the running is worth it, and the people know it.
There's a whole industry surrounding running now, running suits, running shoes, all of these things. You know, what does the amateur runner really need to get on a course, a regular habit of running? Does he need the special shoes? Do regular sneakers work perfectly well, or what?
Well, we cover, in the book, we cover the evolution of the modern running shoe, and I think Tom and Jock are more familiar with that than I am, but I can tell you that the modern running shoe is such a vast improvement over anything we could have got when I was first running. Although I should say with a bit of diffidence that there was one man in my first running days up in Salem, Massachusetts, named Osborne Winslow, who was making a shoe which was comparable with the racing shoe of today. However, that by and large, the poorest running shoe on the market today is far superior to the best of our day, with the exception of Osborne Winslow's shoe in 1957, which I won the Boston Marathon in. But I do think that it's a matter of individual decision. People, before they know what they need, are likely to be suckered into something they don't need. Mm-hmm. But after a couple of years of running, they'll get it down to basics, and they won't be buying too much that they don't need.
There's an interesting story that goes with the predecessor to the Osborne Winslow shoe, and Jock, in a large way, contributed to the creation of the first modern running shoe. Jock used to say that the finish line at Boston in the 30s looked like a butcher shop, the old shoes that the runners had. And they had cots set up at the finish line, and doctors would tend to their bloody feet. And I mean bloody literally, not in the sense Jock uses it figuratively. But this one fella, 70-year-old Sam Richings, wandered by the finish line that day, and he saw Jock lying there with his bloody feet, and he suggested a possible remedy. And he made an offer that if Jock agreed to be Richings' guinea pig, that Richings would create for him, in effect, a blisterless shoe. And Jock looked down at his feet, looked at Richings, and said, you know, you bet if you can do that for me. So they spent a year working on it. Richings was a Peabody shoemaker, a man who worked in a shoe factory by day, and at night he conducted this experiment just out of his own interest in creating a blisterless shoe. An old man with a cape working under a single light bulb, that kind of a guy. And he and Jock worked a year to create this shoe, and Jock would wear it in a race, and they'd test it and make modifications. And maybe I can have Jock tell you what that shoe felt like to run, but that shoe did work. The word spread to all the other top runners, old John Kelley, Clarence DeMar, and they, after Jock got his shoe and it was a success, Richings made shoes for these other guys, and it was such a dramatic improvement over what they had been using. I know that DeMar knocked 7 minutes off his marathon time in the New England Championship race. But best let Jock tell you how that shoe felt.
But I'm going to let you do that, but first we've got to take a commercial, and then we'll return to Sports Talk 58. Our guests this evening, Jock Semple, John Kelley the Younger, and Tom Murphy, authors of the book Just Call Me Jock, and we'll return in just a moment.
It's time for more of Sports Talk 58, presented by WTAG Sports. You can join in our discussion by calling 793-9400. 793-9400. Now, once again, here's Tim Donner.
And my fascinating guests this evening here on Sports Talk 58 are Jock Semple, Mr. Marathon, John Kelley the Younger, one of the more well-known participants in the Boston Marathon over the years, and Tom Murphy, who collaborated with the two aforementioned gentlemen in the book Just Call Me Jock. Let's go to the phones now. Good evening and welcome to Sports Talk. Good evening.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
All right.
Speak to John Kelley, will you?
Go right ahead.
Johnny,
Yes.
are you any relation to Tarzan Kelley?
No, but I wonder if possible. I don't know about a Tarzan Kelley, but I'm thinking of a Tarzan Brown who won the Boston Marathon in 1937 and 1939.
Yeah, well, how about Clarence DeMar?
Right. Now, you see...
Huh?
Okay. We've got a lot of
How did he win it?
Clarence won it 7 times. He has the all-time record for wins. He started winning in 1911, and I think his last win came in 1930 when he was pushing 42 years old. He's not only the all-time number of wins record holder, but I think he's the oldest winner also in the history of the race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he means old John
Hey, is
Kelley.
he still going to run this year?
Oh, I see. I thought you were referring to Clarence DeMar in that question, but my namesake, old John Kelley, isn't it confusing? There are 2 John Kellys running the Boston Marathon year in and year out, and I'm the lesser of them because I've run only 29 races, and old Kell's going for 51 this year.
I go back farther than that.
Yeah. Well, Kell started his winning in 35, and he won again in 45, and I won in 57. And we both have the same name, and then most everybody thinks we're father and son. It's hard to explain that away when you're running along it.
But then again, if
That's what I thought, you know?
If it wasn't for the
Quite
elder,
natural.
if it wasn't for the elder, you wouldn't be the younger, though, would you?
So,
Okay, thanks for your phone call this evening.
Okay, you're entirely welcome.
Okay, 793-9400 is the number to call, and good evening. Welcome to Sports Talk.
Hi. I got a question for Jock.
Go ahead.
I recently saw Chariots of Fire, and I'm pretty sure Jock must have seen it, having to do with the runners in the late teens, early 20s, and if he himself had raced against Eric Liddell and Harold Abrams, and if he thought, how he thought the historical accuracy of the movie, and if the actual did it really portray competitors accurately.
That movie is 150% correct. I saw it, and I have run against Widow. We call him Widow. There's certain things in the old country you hang on to, and that's one of them is your accent. But I run against Eric Widow in 1922, and he's every bit the gentleman they portray him there. He was a real religious man, and would not run in the Olympics because the 100-meter dash was on a Sunday. And he was fortunate enough for one of he was an Englishman, friends, had won the 400-meter hurdles. So he withdrew, and Eric was on the reserve for the 400 meters. He was a good 400-meter man, but he couldn't make the team on it. And they managed to get him on the team, and he won the 400 meters. And every bit of that's accurate, and Abrams himself, I had associated with him, not as a runner. See, I started at 14 years of age as a sprinter, and I ran a race in Glasgow against the world. He gave me about 7 yards. So they were all handicap races, and he gave me a big start. I wish I could have put this in the book, but there was no room for everything.
When I first started working with Jock on the book, he would, each time we'd get sit down in his garden physiotherapy parlor and make tapes, he would bring in some more memorabilia from a closet he had back home, and he'd say, "Here you go, Tom," and he'd dump another suitcase load of photos and old clippings. And one of the photos was a photo that Jock took of this fella, Eric Little, as he says.
And I gave it
one of those faded 69-cent Woolworth pictures you talk about in the
very
book.
Good. It was very good, but and it showed the long pants, and I promised the girl that brought the movie to Boston. I told her about that, and oh, she said she would love that picture. So I sent it to Warner Brothers, and I don't know whether I've kissed it goodbye or not, but I want that picture back in the worst way. But anyway, that day, Little gave me 7 yards handicap, and oh boy, he slaughtered me. He was great. But every word of it's true. They were both wonderful men.
Then I also have to admit your reputation precedes you, and I've heard a story about you, and I don't know if it's in the book or not, about some trip up to Canada and having engaging in a fight with somebody and having a tooth knocked out and being afraid to go home because your wife would see it and give you a hard time. You had to sleep in your salon because until a dentist got to you. Is that true?
Mr. Murphy was slightly exaggerating in that story, and it was supposed to be pulled out 100%. It was even worse than that, but he managed to sneak some of it in, and it got by me in the manuscript. It's not 100% untrue. I got in a little hassle with some of Cote's friends, but it never went that far.
Everything in the book is true, Jock, and just like Watergate, Johnny and I verified with 3 sources on everything before
we went. Well, if it's like Watergate, thank God I'm not as bad as those guys were. But
thank you very much,
it's only partly true. I got into a lot of hassles, but nobody ever knocked a tooth out my mouth, and that's still going to come. Of course, they couldn't do it now because I haven't got any.
Thanks for your phone call this evening.
Thank you.
And that'll wrap up the second and third half hours of Sports Talk 58 on this Monday evening in Worcester, Massachusetts. My guests, Jock Semple, Mr. Marathon, the Dean of Boston Sports Trainers, runs the Salon de Rub Down Physiotherapy Clinic at the Boston Garden, one of the more fascinating figures in Boston sports history. John Kelley, the younger, winner of the 1957 Boston Marathon, who has run in every marathon since then, winner of 8 national championships. And Tom Murphy, who collaborated with John and Jock on the book Just Call Me Jock. We've got half an hour left. Right now, we're going to go to NBC News and then return with our guest for a final half hour, and I hope you will stick with us.
This is WTAG, Radio 58. It's time for more of Sports Talk 58, presented by WTAG Sports. Now, once again, here's Tim Donner.
And back for a final half hour here on this Monday evening edition of Sports Talk 58 are Jock Semple, John Kelley the younger, and Tom Murphy, collaborators on the book Just Call Me Jock, about Jock Semple, one of the most fascinating figures in Boston sports history. And we'd be pleased to take your phone calls at 793-9400, 793-9400. Now, what about the commercialization of the Boston Marathon? Jock, I know you are a traditionalist in the strictest sense of the word, but the Boston Marathon seems to be a victim, you might call it, or whatever, of creeping commercialization. What is your opinion of that?
It is absolutely necessary.
It is.
And I have nothing against getting sponsors, and I have nothing against the runners being reimbursed instead of being under the table. I don't know whether we'll ever give cash prizes, but they'll be opened up somewhere. We must. We can't go on this way with the 7,500 and 8,000 runners and 367 days. Is there 367, Tom, or is I'm exaggerating?
How many you work?
This is it's a daily thing. Every day there's always something. And Will Cloney is getting harassed and he's getting hounded, and we have to have a full-time staff. Not that I'm looking for a job, because I'm looking to get rid of my job. But we'll have to have a secretary, a small office somewhere.
Jock, how long have you been trying to get rid of your job?
I've threatened to quit umpteen times, I know. But, I don't do near as much now as I used to do. But, see, the telephone number for the BAA is my phone in the Boston Garden, and it's in the phone book. And I've asked and asked and asked to get it out of there. Now, maybe this will be one way, but see, a lot of people connecting with the garden, and they call information at California, and they get capital. Oh, I'm not going to give it over the phone.
No, please don't. You'll be having even more trouble, Johnny.
We have to get sponsors. It's getting far too expensive. And the Prudential has carried the load for years, and I hope to God whoever comes in and handles all this commercial part of it can hang on to the Prudential. The Prudential and Honeywell. I don't care whether this is looked as a commercial or not, but they've saved the Boston Marathon from going extinct. They really have.
Johnny?
Tom, Tim, I may be wrong, but I sensed when you asked the question that you were also thinking of the runners cashing in. Was that correct?
Yes.
How
heading
how
towards
Jock
that.
would feel about that?
Yeah.
Well, there's a saying, if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, Muhammad must go to the mountain. The people will come to Boston, whether we give 5 cents or not, because that's where they make their fame. And but we might in the future be able to help some of them financially or put them up overnight. But that will not go to giving, commercialising it, making it like a professional sport, because there's no source of income. Like the Celtics, the Bruins, they've got a captive audience there drinking beer and so forth and supporting those high salaries. And it's a pity, in a way, that runners in my day and even up through Johnny's day, it was all self-sacrifice. But they're still sacrificing, even though some of them are almost like professional athletes, like Patty and all these others. But they're putting in a hard day's work, training twice a day. And whereas some of those rotund baseball players trot around a field and catch a ball coming out of the sun and miss it coming out of the sun are getting those fabulous salaries. There's no reason why the runner who sacrifices so much is such a superb athlete shouldn't get some return and make a living out of it.
Baseball players not your favorite, Jock?
They are not my favorite. I don't consider... There's a few. There's exceptions to every rule. But to me, the average baseball player is the laziest athlete in the world, and if there's any of them listening in, I'll still say it. And it's the easiest professional sports job. Basketball, hockey, a lot of those others are tough sports, but baseball, it's a kid's game, really.
Tell about the triple headers you used to work at the Boston Garden when you were the
Now that's in the book too. If you have trouble getting a book in Worcester, write to me at the Boston Garden and you'll get an autographed copy.
But don't call.
Right? Don't call. Just write to Johnny Semple, care of the Boston Garden, and you'll get, I'll send you back an autographed copy.
I think you could just write Jock Semple, Boston, Mass, and it would get there.
I get what I mean, but it comes 2 hours faster, and the postal authorities, I shouldn't knock me. I'm knocking everybody out.
Let's go to the phones now. 793-9400 is the number to call. My guests are Jock Semple, John Kelley the Younger, and Tom Murphy, collaborators on the book Just Call Me Jock. And good evening. Welcome to Sports Talk.
Yes, good evening. I'm a big hockey fan, and I noticed that Jock is affiliated with the Bruins. I'd like to ask him a question about...
He's got a Bruins pin on.